right, so many of you know we've covered stories about how cities are changing their approach to the poor and to the homeless, making it illegal to feed them, making it illegal to clothe them, making it illegal. I mean, it's just nuts. Well, there's a similar situation happening in my hometown, Madison, Wisconsin, and joining us we have Miles Christian to talk about this. Miles, welcome to the show. How are you doing? Miles, are you there? Well, we had him. Tom, see what you can do if we can get Miles back. That'd be awesome. But the situation's kind of like this: the city planners, the elite, the ruling class of a city, they have this idea that says, hey, wait a second, if we have homeless people around, that's going to drive away business, and of course that's bad. So they come up with these rules, codes, ordinances, whatever, and they say, okay, you can't be here, you can be here. And then as business grows or tourism grows, they say, okay, well then you can't be here. And you notice how we have this tendency to continually treat poverty instead of spread prosperity. Well, this is exactly what you get when you have that sort of mindset, where you just push off the problem. It's kind of like sweeping it under the rug, just, so nobody can even see the rug. And it's really kind of sad when you think about it, how we treat the unfortunate amongst us as if they're somehow a burden or a distraction or an embarrassment. That's what it really is. It's an embarrassment. At least that's what the committees, the chambers, the organizing groups, that's what they think it is. They think homelessness is an embarrassment. And instead of fixing it, instead of saying, hey, you know what, let's rally around this and put a plan together, instead they just try to ban it. They try to make it illegal somehow. They try to, discourage the presence of those unfortunate as much as possible, which of course works to the hindrance of the unfortunate. But I think we have Miles. Miles, welcome back. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me this time?
Ah, there you are. Yes. All right, so we're just kind of doing a little quick rundown of the state of homelessness across the country, how different cities are trying to pass different codes, rules, and ordinances to basically have people ignore or not see the plight of the unfortunate. But tell us what's going on in Madison.
Sure. Well, most recently, Mayor Paul Soglin introduced about 6 new policies to basically crack down on the homeless population. I mean, essentially, he's not just trying to say jail people, but it's more like he's trying to run them out of town. Some of these policies include he wants to make it illegal to distribute food on State Street. He wants to make it illegal for anyone to sit on a city bench for more than an hour. He also wants to turn the Capitol Square, the streets around the Capitol, and State Street, which is, as many might know, is kind of like the main business epicenter of the town. He wants to turn that entire area into a city park so that he can have greater control over the area, and a number of policies similar like that.
I find it a little interesting that this is coming from Paul Soglin. Paul Soglin was one of the youngest mayors when he was originally elected, before I was even born. And he is known as kind of a hippie, liberal, progressive sort of guy. He was there during all the protests for the support of public unions. One would think that he would be turning Madison into a safe haven for the homeless, wouldn't you?
Well, it kind of shows how, when you put an honest person into, politics and an elected office, they can be easily corrupted. And, funny thing about Soglin, when you go into, the city, I believe it's the city clerk's office or the city treasurer's office, they've got a photo of every single mayor in order. So you can see Paul Soglin's photo up actually 3 different times, and you can kind of see him age and progress from being this young, happy person to eventually just get this. He kind of looks like Grumpy Cat in the last photo. He's just totally sold out on everything he once believed in.
So what started this? I remember, like I was telling the audience, I'm from Madison. I remember about a month or two ago, everybody was getting upset because there was a bunch of homeless people outside the city-county building leaving their stuff unattended. And that was kind of like the beginning of what I remember as the push to this whole thing. Is that what kicked this off, or was this a plan in the making for a while?
It must. I think this was planned long before his last mayoral election, which was, this April. And, there's no talk about this during the election. And in a lot of ways, you've seen since the death of Tony Robinson, you've seen the police force in Madison kind of, and, you'd think it would be trying to be making a stronger connection with the community and be more welcoming, but the police have actually kind of got a lot harsher, a lot more arrests during different protests and so forth. And in my opinion, in many ways, I think they're using the homeless as an excuse to kind of amp up their police force. For instance, the top of State Street, I've been documenting how on the sidewalk, they now park as many as 4 Madison police cars on the sidewalk right next to where a lot of the poor and the homeless congregate. And it's kind of like basically the city is using the homeless as an excuse to, amp up the police state a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the case. Has there, now you were saying how this is a proposal that he wants to make these things illegal. Is there support for this? Or is this just, a mayor just kind of venting?
No, he's got a lot of support from some of the city. I would say, majority of your average Madison citizen is opposed to his policies, but, he's got support by a lot of, local business people and so forth. Another thing that I found out recently that was very concerning is there's now a State Street Langdon ban area that basically they're giving people this sheet of paper when they leave the jail, and not everybody, just particular people. But it's basically a picture of the isthmus and a quarter of it with a big border around it, and it says the State Street Langdon ban area, and basically they're telling people you're not allowed to go into this entire quarter of the isthmus. And, they've been doing this for years where they can ban people from State Street because they say that, well, State Street is a privately owned street because all the business owners or all the people who own buildings on that street own the street itself, and so they've used that as an excuse to ban people from State Street for many years. But now they're going as far as to say that, an entire quarter of the isthmus, you can be arrested for being with it.
That's just crazy. That is crazy, especially when it's coming from Madison, Wisconsin, because listeners across the country are going to be saying, hey, wait a second. I thought Madison, Wisconsin was right behind like San Francisco and Washington, D.C. in terms of progressive, help the poor, help everybody agenda and socialism. Turns out that's not the case. Miles, stay where you're at. I want to keep talking about this. We'll be back. All right, we're talking about the state of homelessness, and the city that we're focusing on at the moment is Madison, Wisconsin, since there's somebody there making an issue out of it for the rest of us to pay attention to. Thank you, Miles, for doing that. Now, Miles, before we get back into this, now you have an art gallery, is that correct?
I do. I own an art gallery in Madison, Wisconsin.
So, as somebody who is a proprietor themselves, do you think the homeless people have been a problem for you?
Oh, no. No. One thing I think I've been trying to make the point of is that I think there's a much more cost-effective way of helping the homeless in this city that would provide a real solution. I mean, there isn't really a city-run shelter. There's a series of churches that people are, I guess they're only allowed to have a combined day somewhere between 30 and 60 days a year. And, we have a YWCA downtown. There's no YMCA downtown. And It's like right next to where the homeless congregate. There's 3 vacant buildings, just a half block away. I mean, it would be so easy for the city to do something, else rather than just sending, 4 squad cars down there to deal with one person who had a bottle of alcohol.
Yeah, it is really ridiculous. And it's not even as if Madison has an overabundance of homeless people. I mean, when you go downtown, you definitely see them, and that's, the case with a lot of downtown cities. But you have other cities like Denver where there's just tons of homeless people. So this whole hysteria about, okay, well, we need to make a law that says you can't feed them. This is the part that bothers me. We're starting to treat, not we, but municipalities are starting to treat the unfortunate as almost as if they're zoo animals. Well, you can't go here, you can't touch them, you can't feed them, make sure you don't see them. And it's really taken away the humanity from the situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a different set of laws in Madison for different people. One thing that kind of woke me up to how bad the situation in Madison is, a few months back during the second to last Badger game, I witnessed a young man on the street harassing a homeless man who was selling newspapers, and the homeless man was grabbed, and this young white guy was grabbing the homeless man and threatening to light his newspaper on fire, and the man started to walk away as I walked up, and I was filming, and then the homeless man was in tears telling me about how this guy was grabbing him, trying to light his newspaper on fire, and threatening him. And I watched the guy walk away, and I filmed him, and then I see the cops, and I'm like, hey, you might want to keep an eye on that guy. He was just, threatening to light this man's newspapers on fire, and the cop just couldn't care less. And I was standing there filming him, and I questioned the guy, and he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about, like he hadn't been involved. And then the homeless man walked up and told the cop exactly what happened, and the cop just ignored it. And then I even saw that same kid a few days later told the police, like, I'm going to file a complaint against this guy, and they just completely ignored me again. So, had it been the other way around and a homeless man been, messing with a young college student, they would, of course they would have arrested him.
Yeah, but the young college student brings a lot of money into Madison with, 40,000 students on campus and a bunch of money. So, well, we can't really go after them, can we? And of course I'm being sarcastic. No, you're a pretty politically active person. I see we share a lot of the same friends and that sort of stuff in this sphere. Why do you think there's such an increase in the persecution of the homeless over the past 18, 24 months?
I mean, I think there's been a lot changing in Madison over the last 6-7 months. The exact reasons for it, I just imagine if this is what's going on in Madison, this must be kind of all over the country. It's very odd. I mean, what's going on in Madison as to why they're not trying to find some better solutions. They're just simply trying to, kick people out of town. And I think part of it is that well, if you're familiar with and a lot of people outside this town might not know about it as well, but there's a very large medical corporation called Epic. And so they've got thousands and thousands of people moving into Madison for this corporation. And a lot of the business elite kind of think that, they're bringing all this money along with them. And if, now you can see like there's a steakhouse on the Capitol Square, a very, very expensive steakhouse. And you can see all these expensive condos being built all around Madison. And yet a a lot of these things aren't selling, and they're kind of like wondering as to why they're not. The business community that's trying to profit thinks that, with all these wealthy people moving into town, or these people moving into town who have high-paying jobs, that there's going to be all this money attached with it. And it's like, well, no, most of these people who are moving to Madison for these jobs at Epic also have $100,000, $200,000 in student loans. So though there's people moving to Madison getting high-paying jobs, they're not, blowing their money at a steakhouse and, on these luxury condos necessarily. And so I think part of it is that people inside the city government and some of the business community thinks that if they, sweep out the homeless, that then all this money is going to suddenly come in, but it's just not the case.
No, it's not. And that's a great example of how trickle up and trickle down just don't work when you have such a massive debt load in the middle, which is a whole other topic in and of itself, the student debt problem, which is now over $1 trillion. But you're right, because, you have these situations where normal commerce isn't being able to produce itself because people just don't have the money. They're putting it on the homeless. But, it is growing nationwide. Matter of fact, CNN Money had an article late last year talking about the number of cities where it's actually illegal to be homeless. I mean, think about that for a second. It's illegal to be destitute. And you get in trouble for it, you get fined, you get vagrant citations, it's just crazy. And all these panhandling laws across the country. But it's just not, folks, the rules against them anymore, which is bad enough. Now there's rules against people like Miles and myself and you on how we can help these people. Where, I mean, look what happened in Florida, and thankfully the media made a big enough buzz about it, but that retired gentleman in Florida who spent his days feeding the homeless, he got arrested twice for doing that. And it's only because of media outcry that he got out. It's not like they got rid of the law. They just had to let him go because of the outcry, which is why we have to pay attention to this. Correct, Miles?
Absolutely. In fact, I was actually arrested a few weeks back. I noticed a man being stopped on a bench, and I knew that this was just, blatant profiling, that the man was being stopped for no reason. Basically, a guy was sitting on a bench, and he matched a description of somebody who had snatched a purse, but, this man was innocent, and he's sitting on a bench. The police are running him for warrants, looking over his ID for a half hour. I walked up, and I had a box of pastries, and I offered the man a pastry, and the cop, with his 3 fingers kind of pushed me a little bit and told me, get the hell out of there. And I started walking away, and I yelled to the cop he had no right to touch me. And then he told me I was under arrest for obstruction and charged me with a $439 fine for obstruction. They ended up letting the man go because the man, wasn't even guilty of any crime. But now I still have to go to court next month.
That's crazy. It's just a revenue scheme. Miles, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Folks, we'll be back right after this. All right, we're going to talk to Miles a little bit more, but Sherry from Missouri wrote in and says, doesn't that just say it all? Maybe if our elected servants found themselves without a job, they would have more empathy. Hey, what a damn good idea. Yeah, I agree with you, Sherry. So, Miles, tell us, my producer's telling me you had something regarding the Capitol?
Oh, yes. Well, I think a lot of people outside the state of Wisconsin don't understand or don't know about what's going on at the Wisconsin State Capitol, and the issue is really it's been very, very hard for people to try to get this issue out. As far as freedom of speech with the Wisconsin State Capitol, there has been a lot of attacks on freedom of speech, and the worst part is that the protesters who go to the Capitol the most, this being the group of people who go there and sing every weekday, Monday through Friday, they have actually sued the state and the Department of Administration, which oversees the Capitol. And as a result of their settlements they've made, they've actually ended up giving away a lot of our freedom of speech in the process. And we actually have the Wisconsin ACLU and an assistant professor named Michael Kissick to thank for this. In 2013, they sued the Wisconsin State Capitol and state government over the policies because they didn't want to get a permit. But then they agreed to what is known as the notification system. And so it's the situation in Madison at the state capitol is just really awful.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, when the protests back and forth regarding the unions and Walker and the unions and Walker, when that was going on, you had a lot of people who were, I wouldn't say confused as to rules of assembly, but there were a lot of muscle flexing, both from law enforcement on the city level and then on the county level and then on the city administration level as to the approach of who can and cannot display, who can and cannot speak, who can and cannot even be present on the Capitol and or anywhere on the grounds for that matter.
Yeah, so what ended up happening was this settlement deal, and it was like a 15-page, or it was a 3-page settlement with 15 points to it, and some of them were things like, because of the lawsuit between the group known as the Solidarity Sing-Along and the state of Wisconsin, all rallies and protests are now considered events, and you have to give 2 days notification in order to in order to have an event. Anytime you have more than 12 people, you are subject to arrest if you don't give notification. And what's really terrible is, like, as all the protests dwindled out after 2011, all that was really left was this group of singers, and so they got arrested for anything from holding a sign on a particular floor versus a different floor to being there singing or even being there present. And the group itself, and there's like hundreds, if not a couple thousand people who kind of come and go from the event, depending on the day or the week. There is a group of about 10 lawyers inside of it who basically co-opted the whole thing, realizing that if they just took power and control of the organization, they would profit from the lawsuits that would be made. And these lawyers in the process have agreed to settlements that, circumvent everybody's right to protest. And anybody who has spoken out against this settlement deal, I mean, we've been met with extremely harsh criticism, attacks, lies. I started making some short documentary projects about it last year, and I was basically threatened that I was going to be sued if I didn't take it down, and, it's just, and the 3 or 4 people who have actually spoken out against it have just been viciously attacked.
Yeah, it's weird. If people aren't familiar with Madison, it is weird. I have spoken at massive rallies on those same Capitol steps a number of times, and just the way they try to intimidate you, or they just the overwhelming feeling of behave or else is definitely there. It's palpable. You can feel it. And then, of course, like you said, there's all these opportunistic parasites that just kind of take over things. Now, somebody had a question about the feeding the homeless thing that you mentioned. Now, are there certain areas that the homeless can be fed, or is there no feeding of the? Can you kind of recap that again? What the proposal from
right
Soglin
now,
is?
Mayor Soglin's proposal is that he wants to move it where you can only feed people outside of the city-county building, and that's one of the things he's also making it where nobody can sleep outside besides the city-county building. So basically he's trying to move everybody to the city-county building. that way the city county officials will get so annoyed with the population being there that then they will agree to policies that will essentially, he'll be able to kick them out of town completely from there.
Yeah, and that's really what it's about. When we come back in the second hour, folks, I'm going to give you kind of a rundown of some of the laws that have been passed regarding homelessness. It's not just in Madison either. It is all over the place where it's illegal to feed them, it's illegal to help them. There's even a growing number of laws that say you cannot even lay down in public. And if you think I'm kidding, I'm not, because there's this nationwide effort to really get homeless people out of the cities. So what's your suggestion? I mean, obviously the city doesn't want to use the empty buildings near downtown where they're trying to get homeless people out of. What do you suggest that listeners do? Let's say there's listeners in Madison, they're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea this is even happening. What do they do?
Well, they could start off by attending the, city, county meetings, and, I put a camera in the mayor's face the other day and politely tried to ask him what he meant by turning the city, or the Capitol Square and State Street into a city park, and of course he just walked away from the question. But there's a lot people could do to be getting involved. Basically as a protest to this whole thing, I put together an event that we do now every Wednesday at 5 o'clock at the top of State Street. We get together and we put out a free store, basically just set up tables at the top of State Street, and anything from clothes to books, anything at all. It's kind of like a free flea market. And it's not necessarily just for the homeless. It's kind of just something that I kind of started this as this is a community space. Let's have this be something where the community comes together and takes the spot so that it's not a bunch of cop cars parked right here.
Amen to that. Now, you mentioned something that's really interesting. I'd like to get your comment real quick. What's the point of turning the area into a park?
That's just so basically the mayor can have greater control. Then essentially he can be like, oh, it's 9 o'clock, you're not allowed to be here, kind of thing. Or it just really makes you wonder. I mean, the power of government and we're going to make this a city park so that we can have greater control over it. It's just, there's a lot of legality question in that.
Yeah, there is, and that's why I wanted you to bring it up. When you think about parks, you need to definitely get a permit, and you have to reserve a spot, and that you can't be in there before 7. You can't be in there after 9. So, have the cops given you any hard times about your free store?
Not the free store, no. But when it comes to filming or trying to stand up for what's going on towards some of the homeless population, I've definitely got a lot of hostility from some of the officers. Well,
keep it up, Miles. You have a friend in the media. If they get too out of hand, you know our phone number, and we'll gladly help you out. All right, folks, that does it for the first hour. We'll be back with a second hour, and we'll go to the